Optimizing brain function, part 2. We're going to talk about how these brain cells communicate today and why it's important. So brain cells communicate in a few ways: via electrical signals and via chemicals. These chemicals are called neurotransmitters, or just fancy way of saying brain chemicals that communicate at short distances through the brain cells. And that's the only difference really between a neurotransmitter and a hormone, which you know, dopamine and serotonin and things like that. And many of them function as neurotransmitters and hormones. So what's kind of happening here? So these neurotransmitters, we're going to call them these little brain chemical balls. If this is a neuron, and these are all the branches that come off of the body, and they're called dendrites, they have these little receptors here. And these receptors, they bind to these balls floating around. And these neurotransmitters are all sorts of different chemicals. And they can trigger responses that are related to memory or learning or emotion and all sorts of things, right? And so what happens is these little chemicals float around and they bind to the receptor and it triggers some response inside the cell. Now, more specifically, they'll bind to the receptor and it changes the what's called membrane potential of the inside of the cell. So it's naturally negatively charged, that is. Just electrical charge here we're talking. So it starts at minus 70 millivolts, and the numbers aren't as important, but we call that the resting membrane potential when it's inactive, when that's what it starts at. Now when these bind, they slowly increase the potential, they make it more positive. And eventually, when it gets to around that threshold of, say, minus 55 millivolts, sodium starts to shoot into the cell, and that makes it more positive, more positive, more positive. So why are we saying this? Here's the reason sodium's important, right? We think of sodium with high blood pressure and all these other things, and maybe you see sodium as bad, but it's not just an electrolyte. It's important for brain cell communication. And anyway, so the sodium is coming in, and then, boom, it gets more positive and shoots what's called an action potential. Now, an action potential is just a fancy way of saying it communicates with the next neuron via an electrical signal once it reaches a certain charge that's positive. Then these sodium channels will close and potassium will leave the cell. We know potassium is in bananas or melons and all sorts of things, and avocado, which has more than a banana, right? But potassium is not just an electrolyte as well. It's involved in communication between brain cells, right? And the electrical currents here. So anyway, so you have potassium now is leaving. It becomes more negative and it goes back down to normal where it was. And this is called repolarization. Doesn't really matter. It's depolarization if you were curious when the sodium comes in. But the point here is now it's resting. And after it's fired that signal, which goes down the axon, which will represent my arm, the long part of the neuron, well, it shoots this and then it releases chemicals to the next neuron. And so we have something called the synapse here. And these chemicals float across the synapse. They bind to the receptors on these dendrites. Remember these spines on the next one. And it continues, right? And this happens really, really fast throughout the body. So it's not just sodium and potassium that are important for these processes, but it's also vitamins and nutrients, amino acids that are involved in making these chemicals themselves, these little balls that are floating around, the neurotransmitters that are binding to the receptors, right? So what types of things are they? Well, you have pure amino acids like GABA. You have protein neurotransmitters like oxytocin. You have neurotransmitters that are made of amines like dopamine, or even gas like nitric oxide. I'm sure you heard of nitric oxide for opening up blood vessels and improving blood flow, right? It was we talked about here on When Wellness, where citrulline goes to arginine to nitric oxide. And you see it in pre-workouts and things like that, and things that improve cognitive performance. And look at that, it's also involved in signaling between brain cells. So I really want to hammer this home, because when you talk about amino acids, it's not just about muscle building. It's not just about supporting your tendons and your ligaments and your cartilage and your muscles. They're involved in brain function. And this is why it's so important to eat whole foods that are rich in these nutrients, that have robust amino acid profiles, and have things like vitamin C and zinc and choline and B vitamins, which are required to turn amino acids into these brain chemicals, because they can form from amino acids themselves. So it's like, man, this is a lot. about the brain. And I'm not a neurologist. I'm not an absolute obviously, I'm not an expert, but I really want to drive this home because instead of remembering all the mechanisms by which these things are communicating, understand the fact that getting your vitamins and minerals, your micronutrients, so important for brain function and just for general function in the human body. And yesterday we were talking about how vitamin C and potassium and zinc and B vitamins, they're involved in energy production. They serve as cofactors or coenzymes, and you're not just breaking them down for energy. They are something that is helping your brain break down sugar for energy or fat for energy. And without them, you can't do this properly. So when you look at food, you don't just look at that nutrition label and say it has this much protein, it has this much fat, it has this many carbs, right? It's so much more than that. When you look at, spinach, maybe you'll see, oh, there's like no protein in this, or there's like no healthy fats. Like, what's going on here? But then it has all these good fat-soluble vitamins, like vitamin K, and it has nitrates that improve blood flow, and it has this magnesium. It's involved in brain communication, and it's involved in energy production and muscle contraction, all sorts of things. So, that's really the part 2 here. Now, when you talk about a specific example and how a B vitamin is involved, and not only in brain communication, but also affecting in the sense that is of producing these chemicals that act in the brain, these neurotransmitters, look at something like B6. And in mice, it's been shown to actually affect the amount of receptors for dopamine itself. So it's not only affecting levels of these neurotransmitter chemicals, it's affecting how they can be bound. It's affecting the amounts of these things sticking up, these receptors that are able to bind to them. So it's just, instead of trying to memorize all the neuroscience, the more we look at all of these things we talk about at When Wellness, we realize one thing. If you can't find it in nature, you probably shouldn't be having it. And you should have a wide array of different types of whole foods full of different beneficial nutrients for your brain, for your body, for your life, right? And some are just chock full of nutrients. You look at things like eggs and fish and leafy greens and berries and nuts and seeds and lean meats, and we talk about them all the time. They're full of B vitamins and tons of other vitamins, so many things. But that's what we wanted to talk about today. So that's part 2 of how the brain communicates here, how we can optimize brain function, and you see why it would be important to have some of these micronutrients in a supplement that would be combined with things that enhance mental performance, right? It would be important to have a full vitamin B complex with, say, choline, which can become acetylcholine, or the learning neurotransmitter, right? Because maybe without the B vitamins, it wouldn't quite do its job as well. So that's what we got for you guys today. If you were curious as well, as we talk about communication in the brain between nerve cells and things of that nature, well, let's look at some psychoactive drugs, at least one. Let's look at caffeine. And what happens with caffeine, if you're curious in the mechanism, it binds what are called adenosine receptors. And adenosine is a chemical, a molecule that's responsible for making us tired, right? And so adenosine floats around and it binds to that receptor normally. And, we don't have too much energy when that happens. There's tons of other things involved in making us tired or giving us energy. This is just one pathway by which that happens. And what happens with caffeine is it binds to that receptor itself and it blocks adenosine from binding, right? So that sustains some energy release. And that's what happens with caffeine. It binds adenosine receptors and floods them. And so, we can't bind to the adenosine and we don't get tired, if you were curious. I thought it's worth mentioning at least one sort of pathway of that nature. I hope you guys had a great day today. That's what we got for you. I know it could be a lot. If you're not into science, I understand how maybe you could get lost. We try to put everything in layman's terms, and again, it's not about memorizing any of this neuroscience, anything like that. Just eat a lot of whole foods. Realize how important it is. You know, I mean, when you go have some processed, you know, Marie Callender's dinner, not to shit on Marie Callender, Stouffer's, whatever the hell it is, you know, it's got a list of ingredients like this. You know, it's also, it's not just that it doesn't have a lot of the nutrition, but it's that it's highly processed. And if it's highly processed, well, that's one thing that's sapped the nutrition from it, right? It's not, if you have raw olive oil or if you heated it to really high temperature, it totally changes the chemical configuration. It's no longer really good for you, right? Whereas naturally it's amazing for you, you know, but also has harmful compounds that will actually decrease your ability to think well and to function well physically, right? So, you know, go for the whole foods. Tomorrow, maybe we'll get into some of those things that can reduce cognition. And we talked about smoking and drinking yesterday, but there are many other things we should go through. So today is kind of, you know, what to get into. And as the days come, we're going to talk about what to not get into, what to avoid for optimal cognitive function. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks so much. Happy when wellness. Excited to talk to you guys tomorrow. Let's see who we got on here. Hello, my friends. Thank you. Getting some vitamin D, James. That's right. Vitamin C is great too. Aaron, how you doing? Galen Thompson, Ivan. Choke sub, appreciate that. J-Bug, Natty. I'll see you in a second. Rich, they really are, aren't they? It's so true. Holly, what's happening? Father Cosmic, expressive. I know, James. I didn't want to make it too complex. Mustang, Art is Life. JBW, I am Zoe Paquette. IA Buck, Sapar. Pepeo. Josh BN, Meg, what's going on? Giovanni Amaya, Rich. ADC Peter. Thank you, it's me, bitches. Farron Rivera, what's happening? Miguelin. Das 40, Maxi, what's up, dude? Matthias, what's up, stud? How are you, man? I love you. I miss you. Stuart Strassen, Brandon Malone. Guys, have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. And we will see you tomorrow. IGN. Yeah, I'll see you in 4 seconds, Natalie. MV Dillard, what up? And Lit Jen. We'll see you. Thanks.